Good morning. I'm here today to talk to you about choosing the right report and features to give your users when presenting data in an Apex application. My name is Paul Jones and I'm a development consultant at Explorer. Who are Explorer? Our heritage in the Oracle Partner Network is strong, stable and growing. We're an Oracle Platinum partner with multiple specializations to our name, including managed services, engineered systems, Oracle Cloud implementations and software asset management. We're also the #1 Apex development consultancy in the UK with a particular focus on Forms to Apex projects and developing cloud native applications. We're the current Oracle Systems Partner of the Year and we've been lucky enough to win UK OUG Database Partner of the Year 4 years running, as voted for by our customers. Who am I? I am Paul Jones. I'm an Apex development consultant at Explorer with many years experience with Oracle database technologies. At Explorer, I'm a trainer on Apex. I do various speaking events and blogging like this. We maintain a blog with useful ideas and subjects. There is a link to it at the end. But most importantly, I am a consultant and developer most of the time. I really try to promote Apex where possible and have a particular passion in the user experience field, which I think comes from a background in support. I used to work very closely with users day to day, and so this is partly the reason for this presentation. So, where did the idea and reason for this presentation come from in particular? Well, a long time ago at a UK OUG conference far, far away, it was at UK OUG in Birmingham last year, I gave a presentation entitled Application Support with Apex Applications, looking after users when development has finished. And right at the end of the presentation, I had a miscellaneous section, which was a list of general hints and tips to make supporting an Apex application post go live more manageable in the future. One of the lines on there was, be sensible with enabled options on reports, i.e. don't just leave all the default options enabled. Well, straight after that line, someone asked me a question on it. How sensible? What would you recommend? A totally fair question. Well, as it was still mid-presentation and wasn't a question I had really anticipated, I had to think very quickly about what to reply. So I gave an answer based on my experience of Apex to date, which was essentially give them what they need and don't create issues for yourself. Now, sometime after the presentation, I started reflecting on that answer I'd given and began to wonder if that was fair. Is that the correct approach? Should we be generous with what we give the users? What harm can it actually cause? So that essentially planted the seed for both this presentation idea and how I approach designing and building an end user application in Apex. I really try to put a lot of thought into the process, and so that is the reason for this presentation really, to summarise what the different native reporting options are, what options are available on them, and my thought process for deciding which to use and also how to configure them. So who is this presentation for and who will it be relevant to? Well, it's quite a range. Obviously, if you are already using Apex, then you'll be already building reports on the data in your database. You may be analysing and designing applications in Apex which will be reporting on data. You may be a developer who is currently creating views, APIs and reports themselves in Apex. You might also be a manager or decision maker leading those analysts and developers from a more architectural point of view. You may well be a tester, and one of the things that I'll talk about today is how part of your testing really should be covering how users are expected to be using the reports both now and in the future. You might also be an end user of Apex applications, and this session should help in seeing what is possible and what you should be asking for from all those previously mentioned groups. This presentation will also be useful to people considering Apex to help get an overview of the built-in reporting that is available and the functions that are available on them. If you are relatively new to Apex, you'll probably find more value from the first half of this presentation. If you are a more seasoned developer, then the second half is more aimed for you. So I'm trying to cover both audiences. So this is the agenda for this presentation. Firstly, we'll define what reporting is in Apex by way of a definition. Then we'll look to see how we create a report in Apex. And then next we'll look at the different report types that are built into Apex already, some typical use cases, the differences and advantages and disadvantages too. Then we'll look at some of the different settings, options and attributes you have available on those report types and how you go about changing them. After that, we'll look at some of the common problems faced with the inbuilt reports and features. And then I'll talk about some potential solutions and suggestions for dealing with those problems. And then finally, we'll have a little bit of a summary of everything we've covered at the end. So, a definition. The latest version of the Application Express App Builder Users Guide defines a report as the formatted result of an SQL query. Now, since Apex 18.1, that SQL query can also be natively based on a web service too. But the same principle applies, and certainly for now, the most common way it will be utilised is for presenting data from a table or multiple tables within the database. Now, I know SQL fairly well, and I'm technical. If I have access to a database and want to view some data, I'm probably just going to write a query, usually starting with a select star from whichever table, and then gradually adding my filters and joins as required until I've turned the data into the information that I am seeking at the time. But we are talking about presenting data for users. If all we did was give them an SQL command line on the data, then this would likely be their reaction. There are usually many factors to presenting data for users: security, understanding of the data structure, reusability, and also performance. So the key word in that sentence from the definition becomes formatted, i.e. we will write the query to get the information and then present it in a formatted way so that everyone can understand it. So let's start at the very beginning. So in order to have a viewable report in an Apex application, you need to do the following things. Firstly, you need to define your application within the workspace. Within your application, you then need to create a page in which to put the report, and then add a region, and it is this region which is the report. Once your region is created, you then have a selector type, and this determines initially what the report will look like and how it will behave. And as we'll see shortly, they're all very different, and how you utilize and configure them all is also very different. Selecting any of the report types that I've highlighted on the right there, except one of them, will mean that you'll be required to enter the source for the report region. And the source is the query, which will run on the database, which will then return the data, which the Apex engine will then process based on the report type and options you have selected, so that it will be displayed in the browser. So now we know how to create a report in Apex. Before we have a look at them in the builder, let's summarize those different built-in report types, some of which are quite self-explanatory, some not so much. First of all, we have the ListView, quite self-explanatory. it displays the results from a query as a single column list. Next we have the classic report, probably the default report type really for displaying tabular data in the browser. Then we have the column toggle report, similar to the classic report in many ways, but allows the user to easily select which columns to show. So think about mobile in that scenario. Next we have the Reflow report, also similar to the classic report, but the presentation of the data adjusts depending upon the screen size of the device being utilized. Again, think about mobile. Then we have the interactive report, quite a step up from the classic report in many ways, and it has a huge number of built-in features available for us to try. Then we have the interactive grid, first introduced in Apex 5.1, a step up from the interactive report, which also allows the updating of data directly on the database. Then we have the chart region, which utilizes the Oracle JavaScript Extension Toolkit, or JET library, in order to visualize data as charts and graphs within the browser based on the query that is supplied to it. Then we have the tree region type. This displays data in an organizational chart with a tree structure behind it, which allows the user to navigate down through the tree and nodes. Next we have the calendar region type. This displays the results of the query in a full configurable calendar. And finally we have the PLSQL dynamic content. The slight exception to the rule in that it doesn't take a source parameter as a query, but what the PLSQL dynamic content region allows us to do is to write our own PLSQL to output HTML to the browser and format the data as we choose. So I'm going to now switch to my small demo application that I have created in order to have a look at these different report types. What I've done for each of these reports that we'll see is essentially provide a select star from the good old emp table as the source, and then the only things I have changed or set from default are anything compulsory which is required in order to get the page to save in the designer so that we can view it, which in the vast majority of cases isn't actually anything at all. So our first one to have a look at is the ListView. This actually is one of the region types which does require you to set something in the page builder before allowing you to save the page and view it. But all it is which column that is being returned from the query to use as the display value in the list on the screen. What the engine has done for us here is to take the results of the SQL query supplied as the source and turn it into an HTML unordered list item. Out of all the different region types here, this region type has the lowest footprint in terms of both content volume returned to the browser and also user interactivity options that are available. As you can see, by default there is only one piece of interactivity option available for a list view, and it's this load more button at the bottom here if the number of results that has been returned from the query is greater than the maximum number of rows set by default to process. When you press this, an AJAX request is completed to get the next set of rows, and it keeps going essentially until there are no more results. Next we have the classic report. What the engine has done here is essentially turn the results of the SQL query supplied into tabular data using the HTML table syntax. Now, certainly initially it looks fairly simple, but as you can see we have a built-in sorting available, and we also have the pagination of results as well. Both of these operations are done with AJAX requests back to the server, and they respond very quickly. We have a nice alternative row highlighting to make the data easy to read. Nulls are automatically displayed as dashes, but all the data is there. The column widths adjust automatically, and it's a very usable report type. Next, we have the column toggle report. It's similar to the classic report in a lot of ways, in that the results have been turned into tabular data using the HTML table syntax. But we've lost the ability to do the built-in sorting, and we have no automatic pagination of results. But we have gained something with the column toggle report, and it is this column selector up in the top right hand side. Pressing this allows the user to very quickly hide and show different columns in the report on the screen. Very quick and very easy to use. If the user is using a mobile device, this functionality is very quick in order to show the required information on the screen. Next, we have the Reflow report. Visually, looks very similar to that column toggle report. But we've actually lost that handy column selector that we were able to have on the column toggle report. The Reflow report, however, has a little bit of a hidden secret in it, in that if the screen size is reduced enough, so it's simulating that we're on a mobile device, you can see that the presentation of the data has automatically switched to a value pairs view, saving the user from having to horizontal scroll through the report in order to see all the information. So again, very useful on a mobile device. I think the Reflow report and column toggle report could very easily be combined into a single functionality report. Next, we have the interactive report. Now, the interactive report is a staple of many Apex applications. Interactive reports have a huge amount of built-in features available, some of which are accessible through the column menus by clicking on a column title, like we have the ability to hide columns, similar to how we did in the column toggle report. We have the ability to sort columns, similar to how we did in the classic report. However, it's an extra click in order to get into the menu to be able to do that. We also have control breaks built in to the interactive report, which allows the user to very quickly group data on the screen based on a particular column. The interactive report has a built-in search bar to it, and the search bar operates by completing a like search against the column data, either for all the columns as is default, or a particular column that is selected. So I can enter part of one of the entries. Oh yes, by default it is case sensitive as well. There we go. The interactive report also has this actions menu available here for the rest of the functionality that is available. So we have the column selector available. Now, in order to select which columns are viewable by a user, the user that now needs to understand how to use and employ a shuttle in order to bring columns back. So functionality that's very similar to that column toggle report, but requires a few extra clicks and a little bit more understanding for the users. Also, under the actions menu, we can create custom filters using our SQL knowledge in order to apply expressions to the data, either on the column or the row, and then the any filters that the user applies appear in this top section here, and then the user can turn these filters on and off and remove them as well, and then more filters can be added as they wish. Under the data menu, we can apply multiple different sorts on the columns, so a sort order by one column, then another in either ascending or descending order, and then we have the ability to choose how the null sorting is carried out as well. Also under the data submenu, we have this aggregate function, which allows the user to create brand new rows on the data. So I will create a sum of the salary column, and then you can see we have this new aggregation that has been added to the end of the data there. We have a compute functionality. Now initially looks the user is overloaded, I think, with a huge amount of functionality that is available here. The user adds different columns into the expression that they wish to apply, and then can apply different compute functionalities into it. A huge amount of mathematical and SQL functionality available for them to apply to the report filters. Built into the interactive report is the flashback functionality. Now, providing it is enabled on your database, this allows the user to view the data as it was at a particular point in time. Now, I don't have flashback enabled on this demonstration database that I'm using, so it won't work for me in this example, but incredibly powerful functionality available for the user to use. Under the format menu, the user can apply control breaks to data, similar to how they can by clicking on the column. The user can apply custom highlighting to rows based on logic that they select. They have a few default colors built in for them, but also the ability to enter RGB values and things like that into it. So lots of choice on how the data can be displayed from under the format menu. The user can choose how many rows are displayed by default. And here, so I can extend so that 100 rows will be shown. If I had more data, this report would have extended. The interactive report has a charting engine built into it, so 4 different chart types available for the user to create some charts on their data. For example, dependent upon the department, the average salary. It'd be very quick and easy for the user to create a chart on the data. A couple more functionalities. We have the group by and pivot functionality, mimicking things across from Excel. If the user's capable of inserting those into their report, that functionality is available. The user can download the data in, by default, 4 different formats straight from the screen to those different formats to be saved to their machine. The interactive report has subscriptions built into it so that they can subscribe to data which will run on a schedule, an automated job on the database, and send them the report at the time and frequency of their choosing. So, a huge amount of built-in functionality available, and once the user has applied any of those filters or compute functions, they also have the ability to save their own reports, which will then be viewable for them in the future. Next we have the interactive grid, introduced in Apex 5.1. In many ways it's an upgraded interactive report in that it can also be used for updating data on the database. Now that topic is easily a or many presentations in itself, so I won't be touching on that side of the interactive grid, but in terms of reporting, the grid's functionality is largely the same as the interactive report. We have a couple of new functions built in. We have the ability to freeze columns similar to Excel, and the user can automatically change the width of columns that are displayed to them. The sorting is done very slightly differently to the interactive report, but it's a less number of clicks, which is beneficial. The interactive grid has a much larger charting engine built into it, which utilizes the Oracle Jet charts in order to generate what is displayed on the screen. However, compared to the interactive report, we've actually lost a couple of functions that we had available in there too. We can no longer subscribe to reports within there, and we've also lost the ability to pivot as well. So that's all of our data reports. There are a few other region types I wanted to mention, as they are still essentially turning a query into the presentation of data. Firstly, we have the chart. Now, we saw how charts can actually be created from within an interactive report and an interactive grid. But if we just want to display a chart, say in a dashboard, then the charting region type is the way to go for that. Again, charts are also a very large subject. If you are interested in seeing more, then I would advise checking out the sample charts application from within your Apex page designer. Then we have the tree region type. If you have organizational data particularly suited to displaying it in a tree, then this can be a particularly useful region type. As you can see, it is clickable for the user to extend nodes within the tree and navigate down. We also have the calendar region type. Now, I don't have a huge amount of data in my example calendar here, but you can see the calendar region is very easy for them to navigate through. More information can be displayed when they hover over. There is an alternative view available so that the data can be viewed as a list. It functions very well, and it is essentially just taking the results of our appointment data returned from a query and displaying it to the user in a calendar. And by last but no means least, we have the slight exception to the rule, the PLSQL dynamic content region. It's a slight exception because it isn't simply based on supplying a source query to it, but if out of all those previously mentioned region types you still can't find one that suits and have a very specific requirement on how the data is to be displayed, then you can create the entire region yourself dynamically by writing PLSQL code which will output all the HTML required to display the region. What I've done here for this PLSQL dynamic content region is essentially turn the results of a query into an HTML unordered list, but similar to how the ListView was displaying its data, but within my PLSQL I've added a group by into it so that we go through and display each department on the screen. So, to summarize the built-in report types in Apex, it's very quick and easy to present data from the database to the screen in order for a user to view it from a database. There is a good amount of choice of different types, the starting point really, and even if you can't find the one that you want, you have the ability to create them yourself. The report type chosen determines the features which your users are going to have available. As I will talk about later, it is likely these features which will be the driver for your design decision. Once a report is built, they're quite easy to maintain as developers, can be as easy as just updating the source. They are fully supported components of Apex, so you can be comfortable knowing that they will be reliable. Okay, so as anyone listening who is already developing in Apex knows, although we will vastly be able to change how our report looks from what we supply as the source data, and then the number of ways in which we start presenting that data with the region types will change how it displays, in some respects that is just the tip of the iceberg really. The topic that I want to talk about now is the settings, templates, options and attributes that are available on these report types. As the developer, after creating your region and selecting either the region, any of the columns returned from the source query, or the attributes from within the rendering tree, we are then presented with a large array of parameters which we can change. So firstly, we have the region parameters. Here you can change the source data which is being used for the report, the general layout of how and where the region displays on the page, and also the basic appearance of it. Next we have the column parameters, which will change depending upon the report type you have chosen. We have the type of column, so we can do things like easily hide a column if it contains an identifier, for example, turn a column into a link, or even display an image within the column too. We can change the appearance and formatting of it with custom format masks and even HTML. In the case of interactive reports and interactive grids, we can enable or disable any of those features which I talked about, particular to an individual column. We can also control the display of columns conditionally through programmatical routines and authorization schemas too. And finally, the attribute parameters. So these parameters are always very particular to the report type which you have chosen, but they allow an overall control over the report for things such as whether there is a link column which enables navigation to individual records, the appearance of certain data types, for example how nulls are displayed, the template which the report uses. Now this could also be very easily a topic in itself, but the way in which the data is presented can be vastly changed depending upon the template used. Pagination options on a report are set within here, so how many rows are displayed by default and how the users will navigate through the result set. Any messages to be displayed, for example if no data is being returned from the query. Options particular to the report type, for example in the case of the interactive report, what functions are available in the actions menu and search bar. Downloading and printing options are both enabled and disabled and configured from within this attributes parameters menu too. So I'm going to switch back to my demo now. So let's have a look at some of those parameters in action. Now, the number of options that you have here to customize each report is vast. So I'm certainly not going to be able to cover every option available, but wanted to give a flavour of some of the options that are available to change. Firstly, if I go to the page designer for my list view and select the region parameters from within the tree, I can change the region template, so this is adjusting the display of it to be blank. And then if I go into the attributes for my list view, I can tick this enable search option here. I can populate the supplemental information column with the job that is being returned from the query. And also I'll increase the number of rows that are returned in the layout. So very quick and easy to update a few parameters. Now if I go to the report, you can see the display of it is actually quite drastically different from the default. We're now getting the employee's job displayed here. We have displayed more results on the screen, actually enough now so that we've actually don't even have our load more functionality anymore as all results are returned. And we've given the user the ability to search through this list, similar to how the search works on an interactive report. A like query is carried out against the data within the database, like so, both of which carried out using Ajax functions. For my classic report, if I go to edit this in the page designer, as this report returns multiple columns, we actually have all the columns available to change options on within the rendering tree. So what I will do for this report is very quickly set the emp number to be a hidden column, as it's a unique identifier and I don't want to display it in the front end. For all of the columns, I can very quickly change the layout of how they will be displayed. I can set format masks on my data. So for the salary column, I will set a sensible format mask for a financial figure, and also give it very quickly a more meaningful header. Within the attributes for the classic report, I can set it so there is no pagination on the report, and also enable a CSV export download of the data as well. So now if I save that and view it in the browser, you can see our emp number column has now disappeared. The financial salary information has a format mask on it, and the heading is more meaningful to the user. We don't have any pagination options available anymore as we turn that off, but the user has the ability to download all the information really easily and quickly. In my interactive report, if I go to edit that now, again we have all the column selectors available. Now I can very quickly hide away my emp number again. Now for the rest of the columns, I can disable the functionality that the user had to hide the column away, because I don't think any of these columns should be hidden. They should always all be displayed on the screen. For my department column, I'm going to change it so that the data returned is based on a list of values that I've already set up within my application. So rather than displaying the department number, this will be looked up using that list of values in order to return the actual department name which the employee is associated to. And finally, within the attributes, as I mentioned earlier, flashback isn't enabled on my database, so I will remove the menu function here. My data is quite sensitive in this scenario, so I don't want the user to be able to download any of the data. So now if we have a look at our report in the front end, you can see under the Actions menu we've lost the ability to download or attempt to do flashback on the data. The department number is now returning the actual department name quite easily. So have a look through those options for the interactive report, very vast. Going back to my classic report to just look at the one further thing, which is the template of the report. Now, if I go to the attributes parameters and change this template to cards and save this, you can see the display of the data has hugely changed. Now, it isn't actually displaying any data within here. So when you start changing the template option under the appearance for different reports, one thing you should always refer to is your Apex Universal Theme application available at that URL I just typed there. And if you go to Components and select Cards, under here you can see the aliases which need to be returned from your query in order for it to be populated within the template that you have selected. So I can see for cards I need to be supplying card title, subtitle, etc. So I will go back to my source query and just do one of them for this example. I'm going to return the ename under the alias card title and click save. And you can see now we're getting the employee's name returned in the card title here. So, to summarize report settings, templates, options and attributes, the parameters set can vastly change how the data is displayed. There is a large number of them, and they vary depending on the report type chosen and also the data which has been returned from the source. As the developer, it's very easy, as you saw, and quick to change how the data is displayed and also what options the user has available. There is probably infinite number of ways in which a report can be configured when you take into account all the region, column and attribute parameters. You should experiment with these parameters and learn what each of them does. It'll be important during your requirements capture phase in order to make sure that you are asking the users the right questions. Within a single application, you should try and be consistent. For example, don't show identifiers in one report and not another. Don't just allow CSV exports in one interactive report but all the different formats in another without good reason. It will just confuse your users. You can extend your reporting capabilities even further with installable plugins for Apex. The two main sources for you are on the screen there. Region type plugins in particular extend your reporting options for things such as maps, better trees, different calendars, etc. Give them a try. But one of the things I said in my support presentation I referenced in the beginning, plugins can be great, but only use them if you are having to use them in order to meet the requirements of the development project. Okay, so now we've seen that there are many different report types in Apex and many different options or parameters are available. So what are the most common problems seen with reports? Well, firstly, performance. Users want to see their data straight away. Although when working on the SQL command line, it's almost acceptable to wait for the results from a query to return. Users can easily get frustrated when they see this spinner displayed in front of the report, or the page takes a long time to load in the first place. Data security. With the advent of things like GDPR, data security is a hot topic. It's quite common to see more data being displayed than is necessary and the download option being left on for your reports, which is exposing your data to the risk of leaving the database. Usability. Although we, as predominantly technical people, understand the majority of the features that Oracle has provided us with and how to use them, although I'm still not 100% sure with Pivot, in my experience and testing, the average user find a lot of them incredibly difficult to use. There's a few examples on the screen there. I'm yet to see someone with no technical background successfully add a compute function to an interactive grid, for example. The built-in column filter on data can sometimes be a bit limiting as to the options available, and report filters can be confusing as to exactly how the data is getting filtered and which are applied and which are not. Display issues. Users nowadays use a large array of different browsers and devices for viewing websites. Some things work well, others not so well. You can see there that columns are getting cut off, no longer displaying required information, and also the column filter is displaying HTML there as well. Errors. Yes, sometimes these features aren't bulletproof. Depending how your query has been designed and the options you have chosen, it doesn't actually take very long to be able to find a way in which to break it. And believe me, if you give a user a function, they are going to try it. I will very quickly, in my demo, go to my interactive grid and edit this, and for the department column I will apply the same thing that I did on the interactive report, which is to use a list of values in order to return the department name, like so. So you can see the department name is now being supplied. Now the charting engine is turned on for the interactive grid. So if I go to chart, select bar, the label is going to be the department. The value I'm going to use is the salary, and I'm going to do a sum of each different department's salary. If I click save, I've actually been returned an error. And then if the user refreshes the page, you can see the page has actually now broken. Okay, so what can we, as the developer, the designer, the analyst, or the tester, do about those previously mentioned problems? So we can start by writing good SQL for the report source. Make use of indexes, perhaps materialized views. It's a very difficult one to do, but you may also need to predict the future to an extent. Try load testing the tables which you are querying to see how your report performs. Region caching. If the data is quite static, then make use of region caching, which works by storing and returning the generated HTML for use again. It's a very underused and underrated built-in feature. Use page items and then bind variables in the report to make the user filter before displaying the content for large data sets. You probably need to disable the column filter for large text columns. If they are going to need to be searchable, you're probably going to have to go custom with things such as Oracle Text. Unfortunately, a like just doesn't cut it. Make use of the sample apps for examples of what is possible, and pick the appropriate report type and template in order to meet the use case. Be security conscious. Don't display unique identifiers from your database, for example. Use bind variable syntax in your report source. Always escape any data that is being returned from the database. You should risk assess the data you will be displaying as to who can see it and if it can be downloaded. You should know your application audience with regards how technical they are. This will help determine which features to leave enabled or turn on. Only enable features if they are required or add value, and be careful you don't double up on features. I've seen plenty of examples of page items being used to filter or sort the data, for example, but then the options enabled on the report to carry out the same functionality, and the user gets confused as to which one is currently in operation. The universal theme is great and takes care of a lot of display stuff for us, but we also need to do more. Some things just don't work well if the device that is going to be predominantly used for your application is a mobile device. You're going to need to condition them out depending upon detected screen size, and then give them something such as the Reflow or column select report instead. And finally, probably the most important one really is test, test, and test. I actually can't stress that one enough. A huge amount of the issues that are caused simply by a lack of testing. You should really try to cover not just your use cases, but also any built-in features which are enabled too. So here are the type of questions that you should be asking during the analysis phase. What information is the user seeking from the data in the first place? It will make sure you are returning the correct columns. How many rows are currently being returned from the source query? Is where you are developing, is this realistic data as to what the data will look like in production? And how quickly is this data likely to grow? For example, if you're building an interactive report on a transactional database, and that transaction database is expected to grow at 1,000 entries every hour, you may suddenly find that your interactive report after a few days in production use is no longer performing as you first found it would during development. I mentioned it on the previous slide, but how technical are your users? This will help determine the functions that are available. You're also going to need to find out what devices are being used for the application, both now in the future. Is there any possibility of requiring offline viewing? Is the screen size likely to be predominantly mobile? And carry out that risk assessment of the data. What type of data are you displaying in this Apex application that you are designing? Is it confidential, for example? So, to summarise really, the reporting capabilities of Apex are vast. I imagine for some people listening, I've barely scratched the surface. My original statement on this was give them what they need and don't create issues for yourself. And I set out really to assess if that was fair. Well, probably, I think is the correct answer. But there is a lot more to it as well. Yes, we really want to help our users and give them all the functionality we can in the quickest time possible, and the built-in features can go a long way to achieving that. But as demonstrated, built-in features can also cause issues. What we should do really is take a step back, analyse the data, confirm the requirements that we are trying to meet, assess the pros and cons of each and every choice we make when creating a report, and I think the most important one, if time allows on your project, to test, test, test. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this presentation has given you a few things to think about. If you want more information, please take a look at the blogs on our website at the link displayed on the screen, or also send me an email at the address displayed on the screen there. Thank you very much.